All right, Mr. Chairman, I think we are ready to start whenever you would like.
All right. Welcome to the July 15, 2020 meeting of the Lake Bluff Joint Planning Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals. I will go through a brief prefatory statement and then we'll go to the roll call. Pursuant to recently adopted amendments to the Illinois Open Meetings Act included in Public Act 101-0640, public bodies may, in certain circumstances, hold entirely virtual public meetings without a quorum physically present in any one location. On March 18, 2020, Village President Kathleen O'Hara issued a declaration of emergency pursuant to the authority granted by the Village Code, the Illinois Municipal Code, and the Illinois Emergency Management Agency Act to address the health threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. On May 29, 2020, Governor Pritzker issued a disaster proclamation that declared in-person attendance at public meetings of more than 10 people at the regular public meeting location to be infeasible in accordance with the Open Meetings Act as amended by Public Act 101-0640. On June 16, 2020, Village President O'Hara executed a written determination that given the ongoing emergency associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, in-person meetings of the Village Board are not practical or prudent at this time and until further notice. In accordance with the Governor's disaster proclamation and the Village President's declaration of emergency and determination regarding meetings of the Village Board, I, as Chair of the Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, hereby determine that in-person meetings of the Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals are not practical or prudent at this time and until further notice. Could we have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Member Burns?
Here.
Member Russell?
Here.
Member Miller? Member Danley?
Here.
Member Murray? Here. Member Ryder?
Here.
Chair Peters?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The second matter on the agenda is non-agenda items and visitors' public comment time. The Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals allocates 15 minutes during this item for those individuals who would like the opportunity to address the board on any matter not listed on the agenda. Each person addressing the Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals is asked to limit their comments to a maximum of 3 minutes. Do we have any participants this evening?
Certainly. So we do, in cyberspace, as it were, we do have 6 people listening in. I suspect many of them are here to listen or comment about our workshop tonight. If anyone would like to speak now about something that's not tonight's workshop, about any other item, if you're on the phone, you can dial *9. If you're participating via Zoom, you can submit a question real quick or raise your hand. We'll be glad to recognize you. Otherwise, we will continue on with our agenda. And I'm seeing none, Mr. Chairman.
Hearing none, we'll proceed to agenda item number 3, consideration of the June 17, 2020 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Have the commissioners all had an opportunity to review the minutes? Any
Yes.
proposed changes or other revisions?
Yeah, I just have one on page 5, second to the last paragraph. The third sentence, he does not think employees, no, I'm sorry. Second sentence, he is concerned about the parking and believes applicant and other businesses throughout the CBD. I don't really know what that sentence means. I'm not going to try to correct it, but I think maybe just strike it because I don't even know what I was implying there.
Okay.
Certainly, we could do that.
Thank you, Member Burns. Any other proposed changes or other revisions?
A couple tiny ones on page 6. 7th paragraph down from the top, the one that starts Village Attorney Schuster. Second line says not in keeping of the land use factors of in their code. I think the word probably should be with. And then the next line down, the commissioners must focus on what land is being used. I think Should have said how the land is being used.
Okay.
Can you say that second one again, George? Sorry, I'm still trying to track it.
Second phrase of that sentence, it reads the commissioners must focus on what land is being used, but I'm pretty certain it was on how the land is being used.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Any other proposed revisions? Hearing none, can we have a motion to approve?
Move we approved as amended?
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Could we have a roll call vote?
Certainly. Member Burns?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Member Miller?
Aye.
Danley?
Aye.
Member Murray?
Aye.
Member Ryder?
Aye.
Chair Peters?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is a workshop regarding the comprehensive plans, residential environmental policies, alternative housing, and accessory dwelling units. Mr. Cole, if you could give us a overview, that would be much appreciated.
I would be happy to, Mr. Chairman. Give me just one moment here. So for those of you keeping score at home, this is my second Plan Commission meeting in a row with a slide deck, a rare and momentous occasion. So reflecting, as I think many of us have had a chance to do with recent events, certainly in the world and also in the Plan Commission, it's been a while since we've talked about comprehensive planning. A lot of that hasn't been necessarily of our own choice. There have been very pressing, important policy matters before the village, including, the redevelopment of Block 3, the use of the planned mixed-use development tool, recreational marijuana dispensaries. We didn't necessarily have a choice for a while now in how we have structured our agenda within the realm of what we can realistically do in our regular meetings. Certainly that hasn't been time poorly spent, of course. Those discussions were important. Certainly there were major decisions made along the way, multiple downtown developments, a lot of residential policy decisions, variations made along the way. But due to the timing of a few applications, with how things broke between the last meeting and the next one, we do have a wide open meeting this month to really focus on some of the planning duties of the PCZBA. Specifically, we've structured that discussion, of course, around the draft comprehensive plan. When some of the current members were appointed, we had a chance to work through that before some of these topics started. Of course, we've been working on that in the background, and hopefully we'll be bringing you a fuller draft soon. But as we've worked through it, there's a few, what I would call, I guess you would say question marks, just concepts that probably need more review, either in light of recent developments or just because they may have just needed a deeper review in the first place. As we've tried to put the pieces together, it shows we can tell where we need some more work, some more thought, some direction from this body on what to bring you. So we've brought you back your residential environment policies, which is more commonly known as your housing policies, right? Really thinking about, if you would, transects in the village, and we have our commercial areas, which are spoken about. We have undeveloped areas, which the plan talks about developing. And then these housing policies deal with how our residential neighborhoods work, which is most of the developed land use in the village. What's been a goal for a considerable amount of time through the 1997 plan, through other village plans within and outside this body, is the creation of alternative housing. So essentially, close to perhaps over 99% of the housing in the village is of a typical single-family residential type. There's been a concern for some time among many different village bodies that more diversity, really more choice, is perhaps a friendlier term than alternatives, would benefit for example, young professionals who may not have the ability to buy directly into a $500,000 or $600,000 single-family home, but who want a foothold in the community. Divorcees, certainly the older members of our community who maybe aren't ready to leave Lake Bluff or to transition into a more structured elderly care situation, but who can't keep up with large single-family homes. Trying to create pathways for that balance has been an interest for some time. As we're looking over the draft policies, as we're looking over how to deliver a final product, one of the areas we think the PCZBA should focus on is really how to achieve this goal. Again, it's been a goal and there have been strategies in place for over 20 years. Actually, the progress, if you're measuring just by the numbers, the progress towards this particular goal has been negative, depending on how you count, and the village has lost 2 or 3 of these units over time. Certainly not strong progress. If we look at it, we've seen over time, over the last months, years, the PCZBA's review of proposals. What I would think this is a good framework for the different approaches to how you can get there, how you can reasonably achieve, some diversity of housing in the village aside from a single-family stock. So we've got some examples, some pictures of each, but you have, at its most intense, you have traditional suburban Greenfield development, the idea that we have vacant land or highly underdeveloped land, and we're going to subdivide it from 1 or 2 houses into 50 or 100, and perhaps along the way we can create units that aren't single family. And that doesn't necessarily have to be 50 or 100. That I would even group in that category small developments such as the proposals we've seen for Arden Shores over the years. We have mixed use and downtown redevelopments. And pardon me just for 1 second here, because our stream just had a little hiccup. Sorry, the joys of being a little flexible in pandemics is that not everything goes according to plan on occasion, so I apologize. So we have this idea of traditional suburban Greenfield development. We have more, again, large scale in terms of importance and complexity, mixed use and downtown redevelopment. So that's the block 1s, the block 4s, the block 3s of the world. And those are both well tested in the village over time. Those modes of development exist and are used. They maybe just don't produce the type of units we want to see. The other strategies are less common in the village. So of course you have this idea of incremental infill, right? That we have, especially in the R5 districts or in basically areas adjacent to the CBD, that you have single family houses and on a 1 lot or 1 house basis that you could put something else there. Certainly half of this formula of change is happening, right? I mean, houses are torn down and new houses are built, but again, they're not the right types of units. And then the bottom 2 we bring to you as proposals as we look at the landscape really aren't too pursued in the village. The 4th is accessory dwellings. So we have a single family house. That's the principal use on the lot. Can we create a smaller accessory unit on the lot as well? And by doing so, house some of these different populations. And then the last one isn't really alternative housing, but just as we think about how can you use our existing housing stock or our existing neighborhoods to meet these needs, well, maybe you don't change the form too much, but you can change how it's built so that it's more accessible to people throughout life, throughout different abilities, from an aesthetics perspective, so that it doesn't need really intrusive retrofits to use effectively, so on. And so I should say before we keep going that we're not asking you to pick one strategy. We're encouraging you to think about holistically what's the framework, what's the mix of ingredients that gets us there. So as a little bit of a visual reminder, our Greenfield development discussions for recent memory have included plans as large on the scale as the Stonebridge conceptual plan, ranging down smaller to, you'll remember this from recently, the 12 units on Arden Shores. Again, going back, we talked about Greenfield, we talked about mixed-use development. Of course, there was the Block 1 redevelopment. This could have had apartment units in it, much like Block 4 does, but ultimately those weren't pursued. Those upper stories are offices. Of course, there have been many discussions about different developments on Block 3, ranging from larger to smaller and different arrangements on the lot. There have been, again, discussions, but not realized or really pursued incremental infill proposals. For those of you who attended our workshop last October, you'll remember this missing middle housing continuum. We have detached single family at one end, traditional mid-rise development on the other, and there are all these options in between that are certainly traditional in Chicagoland, but that our zoning codes don't allow for. You may remember this proposal, 15 East Washington, a duplex just north of the Central Business District. And again, you would think in an R5 multifamily design district, this would be a relatively simple project, but with the village's regulations as they are today, it's unfortunately not. It requires a considerable amount of regulatory relief or a planned development tool to build this. Again, also, if you remember our workshop from October, this was a design competition. These weren't development proposals, so they didn't have to present a financial pro forma. But this particular one was by our local Ed Deegan architects. But this idea of, can we have a mix of multifamily apartments and more of a mixed-use walk-up type of unit? And again, even these ADA units, these accessory dwellings in a way, can we redevelop sites with a mix of these? Again, not on that 50 or 100 scale, but small lots, small sites, small numbers that incrementally add that housing diversity that's been a goal of the village. And then finally, our framework, one more time, universal design. Cannot have a whole lot of luck with our stream today. We'll deal with that in a bit. I'm jumping ahead. So ADUs, again, we included an informational brief on AARP in there for you, and there's some more focused discussion we suggest you have tonight. But again, thinking about a single family house, and oftentimes how there are granny flats or in-law apartments or different ways to provide privacy, comfort for a somewhat separated family or residence inside. We can see here basement units, attached units, second story units, all these different forms that are essentially just ways of adding somewhat separated kitchens and bedrooms and bathrooms. And finally, the last one, universal design. People think these are, very intrusive on its face, but really just making sure that there are the clearances, that there are the structural aspects to building a house to make sure that if you're in a wheelchair or if you end up on crutches at some point in your life, if you, maybe have a sight injury or all kinds of different disabilities that could disaffect you, that you have a way to navigate around your house. On a personal level, I'd say I personally keep ending up in like ADA apartments just by the luck of the draw. And the only time I notice is when I can actually fit my couch through the door when I'm moving in, because you get that slightly wider door. It's a real perk for your moving guys. But again, thinking about this isn't so much a zoning policy as it is, you'd look at the building codes, or perhaps you'd look at our development standards, other levers to pull, but how you can incorporate some of these very simple standards into some of our redevelopment. I would say, finally, to jumping ahead a little bit, if you look at the chart on page 5, we've tried to isolate out those houses that have had significant renovations or that are new construction since 2000, so roughly in the span of the 1997 comprehensive plan. That's 184 houses. That's a bit less than 10% of the village's housing stock, which is a reasonable amount of churn. But just as we think, especially about some of these incremental strategies, I think it's beneficial to think if we had 184 opportunities, and what percentage of those reflected each of these, how much different would our housing stock be now? How much more in balance would it be? How much more would some of those needs be met? The last thing I'll say, maybe briefly before we open up the conversation, and then we can come back to it after a bit of discussion, is we've provided some more specific information here about accessory dwelling units. Again, there's been, we were looking at a workshop around these topics for a few months because there's been a few more inquiries than usual this year. Certainly we hear the discussion increasing as given current events, as people are looking for where to house college students or perhaps changing plans for older members of the family. I won't tell you that you could open the doors to this and that you'd have 50 tomorrow, but certainly I think there are opportunities to realize some progress in the short term in a way that's not that, compared to some of these other projects, is certainly less invasive, less difficult to achieve regulatorily. It's a relatively simple policy discussion. But of course, we're interested in hearing your thoughts and your discussion on what of these or of other strategies, what have you, is the right fit for the village. So I hope that tees things up.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Any preliminary comments from any of the commissioners?
Just a quick question. Is there an intended outcome of this where we are trying to inform a certain objective in the comprehensive plan or policies, or is this just kind of getting our thoughts out on the table to help you, Glenn, and staff to try to create some new drafts? I guess I'm not at all opposed to having just kind of an open discussion about it, but I didn't know if there was any kind of end in mind in terms of kind of what you were thinking on this agenda item.
Yeah, so if it helps be a bit more concrete, I would say, so two parts of this discussion, right? One, the bigger policy topic, two, ADUs. If it's helpful to you, the bigger policy conversation can focus around objective 3 of your draft policies. So you have 5 of those. You have appropriately scaled multifamily. You have evaluate existing R5. You have develop a wide range of allowable multifamily design. You talk about the appearance and the transitions of multifamily buildings, and again, more about the aesthetics of those buildings. So certainly, those policies are really oriented, I would say, really towards that number 2 policy there, and a little bit number 3. This idea that these developments will really occur centralized in or near at the transition of central business zoning, although certainly there could be greenfield developments elsewhere that this would apply to. So to your point, we're looking for your thoughts, your flavor as we help to draft this. If proposing new policies or putting those out there for us to draft and return to you with is beneficial, we can do that. You may decide through this discussion that you'd like to see additional language in these policies. And then as we get into the ADU discussion, that's a bit more of a concrete traditional discussion in terms of if you'd like to look at policy changes there, if you'd like to put it as a goal for future study, that's a much more narrow, discrete topic. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
We probably have had 2 or 3 new commissioners since we last looked at the comprehensive plan. And I'm not sure if everybody's had a chance to even review the comprehensive plan in total. I know the 3 or 4 or 5 of us that spent some time on it over the last 2 or 3 years have certainly reviewed it, but individuals like Susan and perhaps Jim maybe have not yet had the opportunity. I guess, Jim or Susan, have you had an opportunity to look at the comprehensive plan, or specifically to look at the residential environmental policies section?
It has been some time, but I looked at it when I joined 6 or 10 months ago. So I didn't get a chance to look at it in the context of this, unfortunately.
Okay.
I did
And
have,
I've also had a chance to review the comprehensive plan and, again, trying to digest the points that are being made this evening.
Well, can I make a comment?
Oh, certainly.
It just seems that, the 97 comprehensive plan and the strategic plan in 2023, really, they talk about this one word about housing diversity. And it seems to be the common thread that seems to be discussed quite a bit. And this take and really looking at ADU would bring both of that together in a way that I feel that diversity is something that we should strongly consider in our town, especially in these times, and wanting loved ones close or living within under one roof. I mean, there's so many layers to this that speaks to our village and our home front. So I just think that's quite interesting that word is in the past and it's current, and it's certainly current now that we're looking at this today in a pandemic, which I wish my mom was close and under my roof.
right.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Stanley.
Yes, I've got a few thoughts that I'll just throw out there. As I look through those 5 buckets that you put up there, and thank you, Glenn, for kind of teeing it up in this way. I think they're all reasonable possibilities, and I don't necessarily want to rule out any of them, but I think we also, being ambiguous and kind of I don't say ambiguous, but just very broad like that, it doesn't necessarily give, I think, as much guidance or, it doesn't really, it's not as helpful. And so as I look at these, I think about what would be most helpful in terms of trying to move things forward. And to me, I look at Greenfield development, and to me, it's just very kind of market-based. Maybe there are ways that we can push that toward a certain type of development, but, trying to go out there and say this is the kind of inventory we want of this kind of affordable, not want to say affordable, but alternative, it really is going to depend on what makes economically sense. So although that might work out, I just don't know how much of a lever that we can pull to get there. So again, if it works out and we have a great development option that comes our way, okay, that could be a good opportunity. That being said, some of these things are a little farther away from the central business district, and I do like the, and I can't remember the term for it, but it's the trying to do development around transportation. And so to try to keep the walkability and getting out of public transportation. So having some of these lower, maybe more accessible properties for people, I don't know if that is in line with some of these locations for the Greenfield development. So maybe something will happen. I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't know if that's something that we can count on. The mixed use and downtown redevelopment, I really struggle with. I think there's all kinds of possibilities there. I just don't think there's a huge appetite to do it that is economically feasible. We haven't seen a proposal, or we haven't seen many that have been widely accepted. I think we're moving in that direction where more people are getting willing to consider some different options. But I think there's this view that we're going to be able to put in low density, low height, affordable housing in our central business district, and somehow that's economically going to work out. We haven't seen it yet, and I don't think it will. And so, as much as I think it's a great idea, I don't know if it's feasible, or at least feasible in a way that many of our residents would be comfortable with. The incremental infill, I think it's a fine idea, but there's just such a small opportunity there, given the number of possible locations for this, that there's very little impact available there. So again, I wouldn't rule it out, but I really, really like the accessory dwellings option. It has not come up too many times in our prior conversations as we were going through the new version of the comprehensive plan. But I'm glad that this meeting is happening, because as I'm thinking about it, there's no extra density. We're using the existing bulk, and it obviously fits within the area, because we're really using the housing stock that's there. Maybe you could build an add-on garage or something like that, but we're not trying to put something into a location that doesn't already fit, whether it be an apartment above a garage, or maybe reworking a garage to be a living unit. So to me, it slides in very well to our existing kind of environment. I think the whole short-term rental piece is a whole separate subject, so I don't want to mix that in there. But I think from making small alternative housings available without having a huge impact, I think this is a really good choice. And Glenn, in your kind of tee up with this to talk about parking, and I really think about this where, I don't think this is going to cause a big parking issue or traffic issue, because in many cases, a lot of these folks, especially parents who are living there already, could already be in the location. I've got neighbors that have many, many cars in a given house. So just because you have an accessory unit, I don't think it's necessarily going to cause more impervious surface, more parking issues. I wouldn't be in favor of necessitating more parking spots, because I think there's especially in town, in a small town like this, people could be coming into these without a car, knowing that they're just going to walk up to the metro to take the train into town or other public transportation. So as I look at these from a strategic perspective, to me, the accessory dwellings is probably the most reasonable way to move in the direction that we want to go. I think the others are possibilities, but I just don't see them as strong candidates, given either the limited impact, like incremental infill that we'll have, or just appetite for some of these developments that we've seen over the past. So with that, I'll pass on the baton to somebody else.
Yeah, thank you, Member Burns.
Member Russell, I'll chime in and follow up on some of David's comments. Bouncing back to the Greenfield development block there, the one thing that maybe some of the existing or newer PCZBA members don't realize is that 10-acre parcel east of Dower, that the village owns that land. Substantially different situation than the Arden Shores property and the Stonebridge property, which are privately held. And in my mind, in terms of developing a quote-unquote missing middle size or smaller size residential units, it seems to me that it is an excellent parcel to pursue. It is relatively close to shopping to the west. It is relatively close walk along the bike path to downtown. It is located directly across from our largest park facility. I would think that if the village You have to spend some dollars, obviously, and engage the services of a professional, but develop before we invite private money. We start to develop and then start to give some indication of the type of density that we would support there. Perhaps we could generate some private interest. I think a lot of the private interest stays away because they've heard of the terrible time it is to develop some of these, larger parcels in the village. By golly, the recent history over the last couple of decades, anytime we have a development of any size, mainly in subdividing up a large estate property, it's gone on for years with all of the neighbors completely up in arms. The developers, I think, tend to stay away if they've done their homework. I would think that the PCZBA, either via the comprehensive plan or other communication mechanism, members agree, I think we ought to start focusing and taking a look again at that 10-acre parcel east of Jawa to try and fill some of this void. The accessory dwelling unit option, I'm completely willing to develop recommendations to include in the new comprehensive plan that we pursue it, but have a little different opinion than Member Burns in terms of the ability to actually implement the accessory dwelling unit option in the higher density single-family zoning districts. Because in our higher density single-family zoning districts, the majority of the lots are built out 100%. In order to create these living spaces, we are going to have extra density, are going to have increased impervious surface areas, we are going to have increased bulk if we're going to allow these. The one example that was provided in our packet tonight is not at all representative of the conditions, in my mind, particularly in our R4 district, which encompasses most of the older east side of downtown. It's going to be very, very difficult to find locations where accessory dwelling units can be developed to existing homes. But I do feel that anywhere that these are developed, the average occupants will have a car. So there will be extra parking spaces. There will be extra cars on the street. If buildings are built in the rear yards of those yards that are empty, there will be certainly significant increased impervious surface and stormwater. As many of us know on the east side, that's the one element of the village's infrastructure that unfortunately over the century, since the village got going, was never properly developed. So it's going to be very difficult to deal with in terms of more stormwater problems. Loss of trees is going to be significant for any of these structures that are built in the backyard. You're going to have to run deep trenches for sewer and water. That's going to impact a lot of big tree roots. The impact to light on adjacent properties, if you suddenly have a higher or two-story structure in the backyard, closer to the lot lines, particularly if you build these on the south side of the block lots, how it will impact the backyards on the north side of the block. So I think it's much more of a challenge when you drill down on the details than what Member Burns suggested there would be. I'm certainly, though, willing to pursue it. I just think that we've got to go into it with our eyes wide open. And the only other comment that I want to make is I think we're going to hear quite a bit that someone wants to build an accessory dwelling unit or create one because of a current family situation. But I think, as is the case with the one example that was provided in our packet tonight for that one lot at the east end, or two lots at the east end of Block 3, even though there's a current need reference for providing a place for a parent or two to live. The fact of the matter is that over the 75-year life or 100-year life of that home, for the most part, it won't be used in that manner. And, you know, there will be a younger couple moving in or something. And I just think that in most cases, there will be extra cars. And although that lot is, you know, it's once again, it's not the typical example on the east side by far. It's a very large, it's almost twice, the zoning lot that's proposed for development is almost twice what the minimum lot size is. And there are hundreds of homes on the east side that are built on lots that are less than the minimum lot size. So anyway, is that enough?
No, thank you, Member Russell. Any other preliminary general comments?
This is Member Ryder. I would like to just offer that I share the concerns about adding to bulk or impervious surface, but it does seem to me that at the very least, we could consider existing properties and the proper use of the existing properties. I read in the packet that there are estate homes that had coach houses that are no longer allowed to be used as coach houses, for example. And it seems to me any time somebody is approaching a use of their own property without imposing additional significant burden on the community, that we ought to err toward the side of doing that. I don't pretend to understand the background by which we arrived here, though I expect that we're very similar to many other communities on the North Shore and elsewhere in making that requirement. But I do think adding to bulk and impervious surface is a real issue. But if one could assume, which I know is a big assumption, that any ADU would not do that, then I think we ought to strongly consider it.
Thank you, Member Ryder.
And Chair Peters, I'd like to just make a clarifying comment. Although I know there will be certain circumstances where people want to build onto their existing, just want to make sure it's clear. I'm not implying that we would allow variances to do this. It would be assuming people would convert their existing garage into a living unit, something like that. And if they didn't, if they wanted to build in and they were within bulk, then they'd have the right to do it today anyway. They could tear down their house and build a big house and do it. So again, I just wanted to clarify, I do hear your concerns, George, and I think they're reasonable concerns and things we need to think about, but just want to make it clear, I'm not supposing that we are allowing more bulk or more impervious surface as of right. It would be within our existing code and ordinances.
No, thank you for that clarification, David. Much appreciated. Any other general comments from the commissioners? I guess from my perspective, when I reviewed the packet in preparation for tonight's meeting, I took the position preliminarily that in, say, an estate classification, there is that history of coach houses and whatever. And so my preliminary reaction was not to have any opposition to that sort of scenario. There's no great impact on bulk. There's no great impact on impervious surface. As other members have indicated, my preliminary reaction was I was concerned with the R5, R4 districts, and probably maybe even R3, that if they're built out to max, there's not going to be a whole lot of alternative available. I don't think we want to go down a path where we alter our quite strong historical philosophy toward bulk, and we certainly don't want to impact adversely impervious surface areas and drainage and things like that. So, but those are just my preliminary comments.
Mr. Chairman, if no other members wish to speak at the moment, I would suggest perhaps you could offer up an opportunity for public comment.
Certainly. Yes, we'll open it up for public comment if anybody wants to check in.
Sure. So if you are participating by Zoom, you can send in a Q&A real quick. We're happy to recognize you. If you're by phone, if you dial, let me check my notes here to make sure I have it right. *9. Again, star and the number 9. That'll raise your hand. We'll give it a few moments in case anyone wants to chime in, and then we'll continue on with our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Mr. Chairman, we have a request from the Mr. and Mrs. Jason and Courtney, Trombley. We'll recognize him.
Certainly. Mr. and Mrs. Trombley, you've got the podium, so to speak.
Thank you. We were figuring out how to click on ourselves here. Thank you guys very much for allowing us to speak. Glenn, the framework at the beginning was, and for discussion was pretty perfect and dovetailed a lot into what our history has been as the owners of the two easternmost lots of Block 3. We currently live at 206 East Scranton, and originally our intent was to build a home on those two lots, which is the northwest corner of Edmonton and Scranton, and with the point of having elderly family members who are not necessarily well or capable of, or are now struggling to live on their own, to be with us and be closer to their grandchildren. Those plans went another direction when, I've said this before in our public forums, as we became friends all of last year through many meetings. When we had another child, or two now, we've had 3 and 4, and that kind of took our time away a little bit. And we went the different direction of the density route of adding a condo building on part of the team, trying to add a condo building to those blocks, and ultimately we're shot down. So now we're back to the single family residence, and we intend to build a home that will now fit our large family. And we also want a accessory dwelling unit above the garage. That was in the plans that our architects had designed a year or two ago, when that was the idea for elderly family members. And we thought we were well within code, because our architect, it was their job to check with code as they designed this. And when we sent the plans in initially to Mike Croak for his initial opinion, and that's when we learned that the accessory dwelling was not in code because it had a kitchen on it. And that's when we reached out to Glenn to say, hey, what's the path towards getting this approved to, as Commissioner Russell pointed out, acknowledged that the lot is almost twice as large as a typical single family house. We're 14,250, and individual family lot is 7,500, so we fall 750 square feet shy. So we think we're hoping there might be a path to allow that kitchenette to be a part of the garage, as long as we fall in the acceptable bulk. But as of now, we understand we're not, so we hope that for this workshop to see if there is a path to allowing it to happen. So this elderly family members can be in our home, close to their grandchildren, but yet still have that independence of cooking a meal when they need to in their own kitchen. So
Member Russell asking a question.
Chair Peters, may I just make a quick point, Chair Peters, would you mind?
Certainly.
I just wanted to check in just generally with regard to the nature and scope of the item before you, and being respectful and mindful of the public comment you've just received. I just wanted to kind of remind in terms of general guideposts of this particular agenda item and the nature of the workshop. I think everyone understands is a general planning discussion to the extent that we've discussed some specific examples of properties, and those are useful and a necessary part of thinking about things conceptually from a policy standpoint. But to the extent that we discourage you from discussing, to the extent the discussion would tend towards a specific property, the specific nature of a specific property, or the potential relief and or different types of steps that could be taken for a specific property. Since we're not in a public hearing setting, and any number of specific properties could have come before you or come back before you again for a public hearing that would require you to build a record of information specific to that property, I would just want to be mindful of the idea that the workshop is intended to be zooming out a little bit more, using specific properties as an example, but not necessarily so much to discuss them in broad detail. So I don't want to cut off your discussion with regard to the comment you've heard, but just to be mindful of the kind of zoomed out focus rather than addressing particular solutions for a particular single parcel.
No, thank you very much, Council.
Zooming out, certainly something we've done a lot of as of late.
That's true. I guess, Mr. and Mrs. Trombley, we certainly appreciate your call. We certainly appreciate the packet that was part of our packet tonight. It looks as though, at least at this particular meeting, it would not be appropriate for us to dwell much further into that particular issue. But I think you have raised an issue that certainly is worthy of further discussion. And I guess from my perspective, I would recommend that you probably continue to work with Mr. Croak and Mr. Cole and to discuss whether or not, or how best to approach this issue going forward.
Understood. Thank you. We're just looking for a path to to present and what tools there might be to be within the law.
Oh, certainly. And I guess we're just not in a position during this particular meeting to discuss possible paths. But
Understood.
I'm sure, but thank you so much for raising it. Yes?
By way of example, rather than specific, is it my understanding that this particular dwelling would, but for the kitchen, separate kitchen facilities, would be within bulk, would otherwise be conforming?
Sure, so we haven't taken a deep dive on this. I think Mr. Trombley and our building code supervisor, Mike Croak, look at this preliminarily. We had a few comments back. So one was that there's a pergola shown across the front yard that would need to comply with the setback as far as where it goes north across the driveway. That would need to meet the structural setback. Of course, the ADU issue, typically the removal of the kitchen would satisfy that concern. And then finally, I think the yards are labeled incorrectly on the wrong axes, but I didn't have a chance to look before this meeting. I think the yards themselves are the right size. So it's not perfectly conforming. Generally speaking, it's there or close as far as what would be built would be fairly similar to what you have in front of you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Any other comments or questions from the public?
before we move on, remember, Russell, did you want to ask your question still? I know we had a little.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I was, I was gonna ask exactly what Andrew went on to explain. As I expressed to you earlier, I was fearing that we were getting into a specific issue that wasn't listed on the agenda and didn't want us to get in trouble.
Of course.
No, thank you, Member Russell.
So Glenn, from just a next steps perspective, outside of the application, or I'm sorry, outside of the potential development that was included for the Tromblies in the packet, aside from that completely, is the idea for this discussion 100% related to the comprehensive plan, or are there other actions being considered or that we should be thinking about? Because it could take another year. Who knows what the future will hold in terms of new issues coming up. We didn't foresee the last year happening either, or 2 years of crazy things coming up. So it could be a long time before the comprehensive plan happens. Even when the comprehensive plan does happen, it just informs new, some concepts that we should be considering, and the board and the village should be considering on a number of fronts. This issue would just be one of those things that we'd want to think about. Let's just say that we wanted to consider, we wouldn't put that in the comprehensive plan to adopt this sort of thing. We would say consider or evaluate, something like that, I would assume. And then we'd have a separate topic about whether we should adjust the code accordingly. Outside of the comprehensive plan discussion, we'd have a separate discussion about whether we change things, in our code regarding accessory dwelling units. So is that kind of a separate discussion that we should have outside of this? Is this linked together to this discussion, or is it just the comprehensive plan that we're talking about right now?
Sure. So I would say it's concentric circles, right? You have the whole comprehensive plan. You have housing, which if we want to talk about anything else in that world, we could. The thrust of this focus really is on, the alternative housing plans and strategy in that world, that being probably the most goal-oriented of those policy planks for housing, probably the most difficult to achieve. And then we have some strategies, and ADUs is one of them. To your point, I mean, ideally, I would say if planning is working really well, we get to plan early, and we get to plan often, and we get to be anticipatory, and we're ahead of these things, before we miss opportunities, before we inconvenience people, and so on. That doesn't always work according to plan. Some of this is the group's level of comfort with putting things on its own agenda. I would say, if you were to direct us to bring you back a draft or to call a more formal public engagement work around this, things like that, they're relatively simple. I mean, these policies have been done a lot through the nation, and we could rough something out for you. Certainly the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus has a whole Granny Flat Academy program that we could probably bring to you if you wanted more foundational work, more educational work. But I guess stepping back, as far as this particular part, the outcomes range from just, we need to talk about this in the comprehensive plan. Let me go even further. This isn't the right strategy. We need to talk about this in the comprehensive plan. We should start to look at doing this in the medium term, or maybe even we should start to look at this in the near term. Obviously, I'm sensitive to putting things on our agenda, especially because getting this work, the comprehensive plan, done at some point needs to take priority. But again, depending on how you would structure that conversation, some of these things I think are very simple. I mean, I think from what I'm hearing from the group, the idea of allowing these, for example, in the estate areas doesn't sound very controversial. And so the act of drafting that and getting a workshop or getting a hearing for you to have a more formal conversation, that's pretty simple. Conversely, if you wanted to look at, you know, a house-by-house examination of the R4 district, or, you know, really analysis-intensive work, that's probably a path I would discourage you from.
Okay, no, that's helpful, and I think, I don't mean to repeat anything, but as I'm hearing it, I mean, first and foremost, this is related to comprehensive plan. It would be up to us to decide if we wanted to prioritize bringing this up as a separate issue to specifically address and like put into action changes. Otherwise, if that wasn't a priority, with the assumption that we even thought this was a reasonable path going down, an applicant, anybody could choose to invest the money to do a text amendment, I suppose, right? I mean, if they really cared that much about it, just in the same way that we would do it if we thought it was a priority. That would kind of force the hand if that was, you know, because that's normally what happens in any case, right? Either we would do it, or somebody has to apply for some sort of a text amendment, right, to change the code.
Yeah, so procedurally, yes. I mean, there are different approaches. You know, certainly, for example, if you look at how we handled swimming pools, we had similar circumstances, right? We had some demand, we had some sense from, you know, our residential landowners that the regulations were quite scratching the itch. Administratively, as staff, we brought you some proposals. We worked through them, I think, in a month, and we got it done. Solar panels was similar. That was a bit more goal-oriented in the world of the village's sustainability plan, but again, that was a staff administrative process, or initiated process. You know, of course, someone can always apply for a text amendment. They have the procedural right. They can start that conversation, but I would suggest to you two things. One, in that context, are you able to best serve the community, bearing in mind that these policy decisions often should be bigger discussions than one property? And then second, you know, I'm always mindful of how fair is it to ask, you know, one residential, especially for homeowners who aren't developers, who aren't architects, who aren't land use planners, you know, how fair is it to expect them to carry the water for community-wide policy? And to some extent, that's their decision to make, but certainly.
Yeah, totally makes sense. I just was trying to put in my own mind, and I think hopefully it was helpful to everybody else, what the, you know, outcome of this would be in time frame also, considering this is part of the comprehensive plan, and if we, you know, decide that this is something, an avenue that we do want to go through, it's just at some point there's some undetermined time that we would have to prioritize putting this on the agenda, or having the necessary, you know, discussion that you've talked about. So thanks for the description.
Hey, Glenn? Member Russell here?
Yes, sir.
Member Russell, I think, you know, I agree with David's points in that in all likelihood, just given the normal course of events, it's probably going to be a considerable amount of time before a new updated comprehensive plan is completely developed and approved. On the other hand, I'm looking at the existing plan, and there's a very specific objective in the existing comprehensive plan that says encourage development of alternative housing options. So I would think that by the Plan Commission, if there's interest across the board, and I'm assuming we would have to actually send a recommendation to the village board, because we wouldn't undertake this study, the ADU study of our own accord. And if they said, yes, by all means, if you've got the time, go ahead and work on it, that we could start work on the development of ADU regs. And as far as the Bromleys are concerned, couldn't we just ask them to apply for a variation for their lot? They have a very unique circumstance in my mind. Sorry, Andrew, didn't even mean to talk that much about that parcel.
So unfortunately, Member Russell, and at least to the second part, I feel comfortable answering if the village attorney will let me, which is that use variations are prohibited by our code. So accessory dwelling units as a use, you wouldn't be able to do that for a variation. You'd have to, just procedurally, you'd have to tinker with more items. Andrew, I apologize, Mr. Fisk. I think I stole your thunder. Go ahead.
No, anytime the attorney is talking less is fine, and I agree with you, yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's Jim. I just wanted to make two comments following on David and George's comments. I think this is a really important discussion, but I also go back to what Member Danley said earlier, which is, it's been a tremendously illuminating last few months, just about the village, the dynamics, a lot of the things we're talking about tonight. And I can't help but think that some of the comments that Jill made this evening are frankly more on point and more current with some of the thoughts that have been on the shelf for a while in both of the documents that we've discussed tonight. And I think this is a longer term topic. I think it's, kind of the planning board hat we wear. And I think it's a really important discussion, but one that needs to be had in the context of a very new reality that we all live in. And I think that, if you really take a step back, the last few months has shown us that as a community, we have a lot to offer, and we have a lot that is very topical and very relevant. And it's not just about finding additional needs to help the families that live here today, but it's also smart policy on this front is going to attract new residents and long-term residents to our community. And so I know there's a great deal of care that went into the previous plans, and in no way do you take away from what was done when it was done. But we have new facts on the ground. And I just think we all need to think more carefully about, and this is what all my fellow members have been talking about tonight, about, thoughtful conversation about, what does working from home mean? What does, having additional family members in residence mean? These are things that I think work to the advantage of Lake Bluff, and we shouldn't be too hasty about this, but we also shouldn't just go to the original plan, which in some cases is quite a few years old, but need to look at the new data and the new context and make smart decisions going forward. So that's my only comment, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you, Member Murray. Any insight, Mr. Cole, with respect to what some of our neighboring communities or how they've addressed ADUs?
Sure. I can tell you, we didn't do a wide survey. There's a few I happen to be acquainted with. So Lake Forest, maybe 2013, 2014, had a discussion around this. That was really, as I understand it, a different context. I mean, they had non-conforming units on the books, and there was, calling it an underground market is probably a bit too dramatic, but essentially they wanted to daylight some rental activity in their community, and so they made a permitting process for accessory dwelling units, as I understand the context. So there, I think that policy is really directed towards existing units and not towards creating new ones. On the opposite end, of course, Evanston, which is much different from Lake Bluff on the other end of the North Shore, has very robustly embraced this as a affordable housing policy and as even a diversity policy. In between, and actually the village attorney might be familiar with some of these communities too a bit better than I would say there's a lot of discussion about the topic, especially in different towns as they look at certainly their affordable housing mandates. I don't have a great sense to bring to you tonight about particular policies or particular implementations.
Thank you, Mr.
And I'd certainly echo what Glenn said. I'm not familiar with seeing a lot of new regulations hitting the books with rapidity, but there certainly is a conversation, as Glenn noted, that both in the context of affordable housing and housing diversity is really at the forefront of many of our clients and your neighboring communities.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other general comments from the membership?
plus I have a statement I'd like to state. For the planning commission, for the comprehensive plan, I think each one of these 4 items should be in the comprehensive plan with some subset as to what we believe or should be in the future. Given the current issue, this is a workshop for ADUs as well. I think we should have on our agenda a public hearing and set up a set of rules to have ADUs in the community since it's already being brought up. So let's not put the cart before the horse, and let's keep these 2 issues very separate. Yes, these items should be in the comprehensive plan for the future, but we have to deal with the ADUs now because there is someone in the community who is interested in doing this. I think our next meeting, if it's possible, should include a discussion of the public hearing for ADUs. Put it on the books.
I may echo Member Miller's comments. I think that from what I can tell anyway, the ADU concept is not inconsistent, and indeed George pointed out in a way in which it is entirely consistent with the 1997 comprehensive plan. We're not doing something that's contrary to that, as I understand it, to consider ADUs, but we need to consider more than simply ADUs as part of the comprehensive plan. And given what Member Danley and Member Murray were talking about the change of reality that's happened, like the new normal, so to speak, that's happened in the last 4 months, I do view this as being more relevant and perhaps more urgent than it might have been just six months ago. Certainly, 23 years ago. So I would suggest that we do something on ADUs in particular. And further, just to the point that Glenn made, that one option would be to allow them in the estates. That would be more limited than what I'd be looking for. I'd be looking for anything that doesn't add to bulk or does not require a variance, even in the districts, but or in the residential R4 district. So that's where my head is at.
Yeah, and Jill, it's Jim. I'm exactly on the same page. If you're not impinging on the other restrictions on the property, in other words, if you're not impinging on your neighbors, and this sort of structure, I just have a question. What is the public interest in regulating this? Right. It seems like it was an overreach to begin with, and we've all seen a spotlight shown on this now. And I agree about your urgency point. I didn't mean to say it was an urgency. I just mean that we have to be thoughtful and have the right process around it. I think it was Member Russell who spoke about, should we have a public hearing on this? And I think we ought to be scheduling that as soon as possible.
Is that the general consensus of all the commissioners to go forward with a public hearing in the near term?
Yes.
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 Yeah,
Certainly.
yeah, I support going forward. I'm not sure that next month ought to be a public hearing before the zoning board even has a workshop to review the regs.
Well, and Glenn, don't you need to draft something for which we're actually going to have a public hearing to review? So I think we might need 1 month to have Glenn put something together, we react to it, we see if we're on board with that. Maybe there are a couple revisions to it, and then the month following that is the public hearing on a draft that we've had a chance to review. I don't think that's delaying too much, but I think we're going to need 1 cycle to get something to look at and react to before we go straight to a public hearing. That'd be my recommendation.
Thank you, David. Glenn?
Yeah, I would offer 2 comments. So to an earlier comment Member Russell made, of course you can choose to initiate your own text amendment process. I think as a point of information, we'll make sure the village board is aware of this conversation. Again, they're planning to talk about goals like this. same so as we do with all our committees, we will keep them apprised of what you're up to. Member Burns, to your point, it's up to this group how you prefer to approach it. Certainly, if we start a public hearing, you're not locked into what we bring you on the first draft. You can always continue it. The upside of a public hearing is certainly that, no pun intended, it puts people on notice and makes sure that this has attention and interest. I know that we did, compared to our usual workshops, we do have quite a bit of interest. It did sense, between our attendees and correspondence, there's a bit more interest in the norm, but it never hurts to, saying you're looking at changing it is a way to further get the word out and help us. If you're, stepping back, a public hearing is often not the best way to get public participation, but it doesn't hurt. We can complement that with other tools as well and try to bring you some information. Or we can take a little bit slower too.
Well, and I'm not proposing that we try to delay it, and if you think we can come up with something, I'm all for it. I just didn't want to try to accelerate this faster than reasonable and try to jam something through. So if the group thinks that we can do it, and Glenn, you can support it, then I'm open to. I didn't want to say that I necessitated an extra meeting there, but just want to make sure we were prepared and had all the information available to make a good decision.
David, I support your first option. I really think we ought to have a workshop first. I mean, our board could completely disagree with what Glenn brings forward. Sorry, Glenn, but to needlessly create a lot of uproar throughout the whole community, it just seems to me that it's more prudent to, probably going to be the same number of total meetings anyway, but to have a workshop first would just be a better approach.
I agree. I don't think we should rush into this. I think we should think about it, and I agree, a workshop next with what the village feels is the appropriate approach to ADUs. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm inclined to go down that path also.
Makes sense to me. The only urgency I was referencing was not to try to put together a comprehensive plan first. So, yeah.
And that won't happen.
Yeah.
Well, and to Jill's point, I don't think it should, right? There's some pretty clear stuff here about how we ought to approach this.
Right.
So to summarize what I'm hearing, if I could, Mr. Chairman. So on the broader conversation, I think what we heard at the start was that there's, there are, and we'll go back and parse over it again. Certainly there are strategies we think that are less likely, I guess I would say, to be possible in the near term. Certainly it sounds like the group is open to any of these as far as how we include these in the comprehensive plan, and we'll, as we proceed with that, we'll work on some language, perhaps some alternate policies. We'll bring that back to you at a later date to talk about. As far as the ADU discussion, we'll aim to bring you draft regulations at a workshop at your next meeting. I think we'll look at the regulations and how we can make sure these fit well, especially in our denser districts, consistent with, for example, Member Russell's concerns. Give us a chance to workshop that a bit. If there is any differentiation, it sounds like the estate districts would be more permissive than, say, what we have in the east side. And I think certainly we can prepare a good directed workshop on that subject for you at your next meeting. And if you'd like, we can look at some additional attempts to garner some public participation in that too, if you'd want to have that element at your next workshop, or we can focus just on the regulations. But I think that's the marching orders I'm hearing, and I think that's something we can work with.
I think as a community, I think ADUs for family members are gonna probably be a no-brainer. My concern would be ADUs for rental. I think that's where we're gonna hit a brick wall with this community, as I would not want that as my neighbor either. So when you're making your assumptions here, I think we have to really put that in light, what we're gonna allow or at least be permissive in these secondary dwellings.
Oh, those are very good points, Member Miller. From my perspective, Glenn, I agree with your approach. I'm just not sure we want the public comment at the next meeting until we've had an opportunity to work our way through these issues. There's been a tremendous number of excellent points made this evening, especially on relatively short notice, because I don't think we knew this was percolating until Friday night. And but it seems as though the members are very much engaged, very willing to participate in the process going forward. So I would urge you to go down that path without the public comment next meeting.
Okay. Certainly we can do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, ahead of that meeting, I think the staff has always done a great job of bringing topical information to date. And I go back to Member Danley's comments earlier. I think this is a great opportunity to take stock of new facts. And to the extent the village staff can bring facts to bear for this group as to, how really the needs of some of our residents have changed over the period of the quarantine and the public health crisis. I think that helps make it clear to folks why action in the near term here makes sense. And how, while we all may be sitting here saying that action in a matter of weeks makes sense, there's a lot of folks who, have much more pressing needs in our community. So to the extent we can help put facts on that basis into the public record, I think it would be helpful in supporting whatever action we take in the future.
No, just to follow up on that point, Member Murray, I guess one of my thoughts or requests would be to get additional insight from Mr. Cole and staff regarding what sort of inquiries have been generated to the village over the last several months on this particular topic. Obviously, the issue that Mr. and Mrs. Trombley have raised certainly is very, very insightful, but I'd be interested in whatever other comments the village has received on this particular issue.
Certainly.
Any further discussion on this topic tonight? I think we made tremendous progress in a relatively short period of time.
Very effective.
Comments out there, and Glenn got us all thinking.
You guys did the hard work. I just get to ask questions. That's the easiest part.
All right.
I'm sorry, one more comment, and I don't think it's for discussion today, but I would, hearing Elliot's comment about rentals, I think that will be, as I look forward to the next meeting, I think that will be a pretty heated discussion. So I would recommend that people think about that in terms of what you would be comfortable with, if anything, in that regards, because I think we're going to need to put some details around what this is. And there's a big difference in my mind of a short-term rental of a night or 2 nights or a week versus someone that's leasing a place for 5 years or something like that. And so I'm not suggesting one thing or the other. I just think that's something that I think we all should think about over the next month, to kind of think about what we're comfortable with, because I think being able to lease something like this does help the alternative housing goal that we're trying to achieve. But there may be certain restrictions on that that allow us to be more comfortable with those kind of arrangements, or maybe not, depending on how you look at it. So just something to think about, because I think there are a lot of no-brainer pieces of this, but I think that leasing or renting piece is probably the most contentious. So just kind of mull that over. I'm not trying to bring that up now, but I can foresee that's going to be a big part of the conversation next month.
No, thank you, Member Burns. Any further discussion from the commissioners or any discussion from the public?
This is Member Ryder. Just one more point to that. I wonder if in our discussions, we can make clear that we aren't considering any change to the short-term rental policies as a result of this. We would be talking about this in the context of long-term leases rather than opening the door to STRs, because I think if people perceive that that's on the table, then we really are asking for a lot of debate. And so I think when we're talking about this, we need to take a great deal of care in distinguishing between those two and making clear to the public that we're not talking about reopening the STR issue as part of this discussion.
No, that's an excellent point. I anticipate we'll have a rather robust discussion next month on this particular issue.
Should be good.
No, thank you for raising it, Mr. Cole. Hearing no further comment, agenda item number 5 is staff report.
Certainly, I'd offer a few reports. So I'm teasing up our meeting next month. We have a few things coming down the pipe. So of course there'll be this item. We believe, it's still not positive, but believe the Jaguar dealership will choose to move forward with their public hearing. They applied, as you recall, back in March before COVID-19, before our current circumstances. And so as the nature of our meetings and their economics doesn't look like it's changing anymore, we think they'll move ahead. We'll have, it appears, another residential discussion as well. As most of you may not know, but there are a few special uses that apply in the village's residential districts. So one this group has seen recently is Bluff elevators, or trams, if you would. Another is subterranean parking garages. And so there's some interest in that. Should be a straightforward item, but some good discussion. And that's all we're aware of at this time. Again, over the next few months, I would say to expect that we'll try to continue to keep comprehensive plan discussions on your agenda as we continue to draft and continue to try to fit some of these pieces together. As always, it's refreshing to have a planning conversation. So if there's topics of interest to the commissioners, you're always welcome to give me a call, drop me a note. We're always happy to look at how we can create productive conversations and make sure we're balancing the different roles this committee serves. Again, I'm very grateful to have Sam Lennox here with us. I think you saw in the packet that she's already doing some pretty nifty work and helping bring us some extra context, some extra data. And so I'm looking forward to her continued assistance with this group. We also, I can't introduce her tonight, but I can tell you that we have an undergraduate planning intern from the College of Lake Forest as well. A very gifted young woman by the name of Allison Caskey, and so we're looking forward to having her assistance in the fall as well. So hopefully, chances to get some good work done. Finally, I have a bit of a personal proud announcement to make. So as some of you may know, I am a practicing city planner, but I am not one by education. My education's in city management, public administration from the University of Kansas. But late last month, I did pass the comprehensive planning exam from the American Planning Association. So I have to give them some money first before they'll let me use the title, but I'm an official planner now. So I'm sure that the competence is just radiating from me, certainly my ego. But it's something I've been working towards for a while, and I'm very proud of that achievement and proud to continue to serve this body.
Congratulations, that's excellent.
I have an idea. I figure if you had to do your thesis, you can redo our comprehensive plan and hand that in as your thesis.
Just about. It's got enough writing.
Oh, that's excellent.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Glenn. That's great.
Appreciate it. Of course, this is I had my birthday during the whole pandemic thing, and now this, so I really have to, really challenging me to come up with new and exciting ways to celebrate zooming out, as the village attorney put it. So, that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you, Mr. Cole. Commissioners report.
Just one question. Are we going to be lucky enough to have Village Attorney Fisk at our meetings on a regular basis, or is this a once in a decade appearance?
I don't know, but I do want to just say quickly how nice it is to be among you and to meet those of you virtually who I haven't had the chance to meet yet. It's always a tremendous pleasure to be working with you and furthering the goals of Lake Bluff. So it's wonderful to see everyone, and I would be very grateful to see you again. We'll see what comes down the road. If Ben gets out of that trunk that I locked him in, we'll deal with that.
Yeah, no, it was great to see Andrew tonight, and anytime, Andrew, whenever Ben's not available, we look forward to your participation.
I should mention, and very negligent of me not to give a better introduction, of course, Andrew Fisk, with Elrod Friedman, another excellent member of the staff of our village attorney. Ben Schuster, of course, has other matters he had to attend to tonight for the firm, but Andrew, once upon a time, was the liaison to this group. So he worked with Member Russell, with Chair Peters, and with others, and so this is a fun reunion tour. 10-year vintage, like a fine scotch.
Yeah. No, very, very pleasant surprise tonight.
Thank you.
Any other issues? Well, hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Right. Roll call?
Yes. Member Burns?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Miller?
Aye.
Stanley? Member Murray?
Aye.
Member Ryder?
Aye.
Chair Peters?
Aye.
The motion carries. You stand adjourned at 8:34.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, everybody.
Aye.
Be well.
Everybody, thanks.